A step towards Colombia's promised peace, or a step towards a new kind of chaos. After more than 50 years of conflict, members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia have been laying down their weapons. But as the Farc demobilises, other armed groups are trying to take their place. The United Nations says dozens of political activists have been killed this year, with many murdered in areas abandoned by the Farc, areas with lucrative illegal mining or drug trafficking operations, now there for the taking. The government had promised to move troops into all of these zones, but so far that hasn't happened, and that's created a power vacuum.
There is a paramilitary front, or as the government likes to call them, the criminal gangs. For the communities, they are the same thing, and this has generated a situation of terror inside the communities.
Colombia's right-wing paramilitary groups emerged in the 1970s to counter leftist guerrilla groups like the Farc. They were officially disbanded more than a decade ago, but their remnants operate criminal gangs, which the government doesn't see as having any political stake. But even groups with a stake have been trying to capitalise on the void left by the Farc. The National Liberation Army, or ELN, is the last active group in Colombia's decades-long guerrilla conflict that's killed more than 220,000 people. After brokering its controversial peace deal with the Farc, the government began talks with the ELN in February.
The ELN accepts that international humanitarian law is the guide, the lighthouse that will guide our work in this humanitarian negotiating table.
We're convinced that Colombia wants peace, and we, the National Liberation Army, are not indifferent to those hopes.
But talk of peace hasn't stopped the violence. In February, ELN claimed responsibility for a bomb that targeted riot police in Bogotá, and there are reports of another attack just this week. And parts of the ELN are also trying to take control of former Farc territories. Colombia's historic peace deal with the Farc was heralded as the end of the last armed conflict in the Western Hemisphere, a peace effort worthy of a Nobel Prize. But has Colombia's focus on achieving peace with one enemy strengthened another? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Opposition Senator Paloma Valencia, who's with the Democratic Colombia Party, and the International Crisis Group Senior Colombia Analyst Kyle Johnson. Thanks both of you for joining us. Senator Valencia, how dangerous is this group, the ELN? Can they actually plunge Colombia back into civil war?
Well, Colombia hasn't had a civil war. We have had terrorist hazard upon our citizens and our state. But Colombia hasn't had a civil war in the last years. Farc is a terrorist group as well as the ELN. The ELN has been now taking control over the narcotraffic business and all the illegal mining business. And they have a lot of money, and they're negotiating with the government, so they're trying to use this money to push the government to give them more that the Farc obtained in these negotiations.
And just so we're absolutely clear, I mean, you have the government that negotiated this peace deal. You're not happy with it. There are those who recognize the Farc as a legitimate political party. They trust them to disarm, and they trust them with the peace process. Tell me why you do not.
Because, no, we're happy that they're going to go into giving up the weapons. The thing is, they should be punished by the crimes they committed. Crimes against humanity, kidnapping, recruiting of children, abuse of women, bombs in the middle of the towns of Colombia. So these crimes against humanity, these war crimes should be punished. And it's very disturbing, the fact that they are not paying not even 1 day of jail, and they're going to have posts in the office and be politicians without even needing votes. They will have a lot of posts that are just given to them without votes. So that's very dangerous for Colombia, because it gives a wrong message, right. The message that it doesn't matter if you're a terrorist. At the end, if you negotiate, you can avoid jail, and you can be just giving prizes for what you've done.
Yeah, and things so, I mean, this is an example of how things are fundamentally unresolved, and Colombian society is fundamentally divided on this issue. Kyle, did the government maybe misread or underestimate the power of groups like the ELN as they fill a vacuum, a void vacated by the Farc as they try to mainstream themselves and have a peace process with the government?
Yeah, I believe the government underestimated to a certain extent the ability of these groups, not only the ELN, but other drug trafficking organizations, to actually fill these voids by the Farc. At the same time, I think timing was very difficult for the government of exactly when they could move into these areas without making too much noise, as we say, within the negotiation with the Farc. So I think the issue is groups like the ELN, which are seen to be very, they operate in Colombia's periphery. The ELN is seen to be much weaker and smaller than what it probably actually is, was one of the factors that kind of surprised the government how quickly these groups were able to take over Farc territory.
Senator Paloma Valencia, how would you distinguish between the Farc and the ELN? How would you fundamentally distinguish between them?
They don't have any difference. It's just the name they use. They do the same business, which is drug trafficking, kidnapping, extortion, illegal mining, and they kill people. They kill police officers. They just extort the people. So it is the same people. It is the same business, and it should be punished. And it's what is very worrying in this situation, that is the preoccupation we have at this point, is that the message the government gave to Farc that all the crimes will be just pardoned. It's the same message the ELN is receiving. So they are just increasing the kidnapping, increasing the killing of police officers. They're increasing the attacks over Colombian towns and Colombian people, and they are willing to negotiate in the basis that they won't be punished for any of these crimes. So it's a very disturbing situation we're living now.
Kyle, is the president going to lose support the longer this goes on? The more we see these kind of pot shots from the ELN, blowing up pipelines, abducting people, would people start to believe less and less in a peace process?
Definitely. I think one of the issues with the ELN right now is their continued violence, and they haven't quite understood that even though on a local level for them these types of actions are important, on a national level they're widely rejected by the Colombian population. Santos may suffer because of this, but really it'll be the peace negotiations in general. Santos is in a poor moment politically anyways, but the peace negotiation process will lose legitimacy and lose support amongst the people if the ELN continue to carry out these attacks. Now, the ELN carry out these attacks in part because that's their way of pressuring the government, of pressuring the negotiation table. It's a fairly common practice in peace processes. It's unfortunate, but common. But if the ELN continues, especially to kidnap people, this is where the table will suffer in terms of legitimacy, political support, and it might not even be able to get going in terms of momentum because the government and ELN will be continuing just to talk about kidnapping and not actually what's on their agenda.
Senator, what I really regret is that we actually had one of the government negotiators in the peace process, Maria Alejandra Villamizar Maldonado. She agreed to come on the show and then pulled out at the last minute because it would have been nice for her to be in the mix in the discussion. But I want to ask you, and I wanted to ask you while she was involved in the discussion, what you think of these negotiators, those who are involved negotiating with the ELN right now, whether they are naive or whether they are on the right path.
I think it's different, the agenda of a government than the agenda of a country, because the government has a short time and they have to fulfill what they promise in this short time. So they are willing to do things probably that are not good for the country, but they're good for the results. So I think there is a time of a different timing for the country and for the government, and that is against the government and against the negotiation, which should be looking for justice, especially in a country like this, because otherwise you are only given the message that crime is a way into politics. And Colombia has been trying to avoid this practice, which has been like the cause of many of the violence we have historically living. So it's very important to point out at some point in our history that we are not willing to give political power who those who are using weapons against Colombians.
But isn't there some give and take, Senator? I mean, I come from South Africa, still more than 20 years after the end of apartheid. Some people debate whether Nelson Mandela sold out, whether the ANC gave too much, it compromised too much. Don't you have to compromise some aspects of justice in order to get peace?
I think it's very different, the situation in South Africa, because you have this racial issue which was dealing with the people. Here we only have, Farc was, I don't know, 6,000 people, and ELN should be, I don't know, 2,000 people, and they don't have any support in the population. There are illegal businesses that they run that give them money to buy guns and to buy more people to be in the organization, but there is not a real political, social statement in their behavior. And that's why people don't like them. That's why when the president submit this decision, this peace agreement to the Colombians in majority say no, because people don't like Farc, and people who have been in the areas where Farc or ELN take control has had a very bad time. Farc and ELN had done nothing for Colombian people ever.
Mm-hmm. Senator Paloma Valencia, I wonder what you think of the country next door, Venezuela. It's got its own problems right now, and we're a long way away from the days of Chavez and when Venezuela was a player in the region. But is Venezuela still supporting the likes of the ELN?
Yeah, absolutely. Venezuela have been supporting all terrorist organizations as ELN, as Farc. They have a lot of camps in their territory with the alliance of the government. We should point out that the government of Venezuela, the Chavismo, even the nephews of President Maduro have been persecuted because they are involved in drug trafficking. They have been condemned in the United States, and they confess that many of the heads of the Chavismo in Venezuela are linked to the business of drug trafficking, and the providers are Farc and the ELN. So there's this whole organization of drug trafficking that has been infiltrating into the Venezuelan government and into its army.
Senator, would you be happy if Farc was disarmed by the end of the year, but without the elements of justice that you wanted, but at least they would have handed in all their weapons?
Well, it's very difficult to know if they're handing all the weapons, because the government didn't want to make an estimate of how many weapons they should give up. And it's very worrying, the fact that they have been finding some weapons that are hidden. And Farc says, well, we have a lot of hidden weapons and we're going to surrender them. But nobody knows if this is the whole package of weapons, or is it only some of them. Because in some municipalities of Colombia, many people said that Farc are hiding weapons to secure the process, as they say. If something goes wrong, they will have some weapons in hidden places, so they can react if the government try to not go into the whole process. The fact that they give up the weapons, it's something good, but there is a lot of money to buy many more, because the business of drugs has grown so much in Colombia. Colombia is now, because of the government, the first producer of cocaine in the world again. So we have a lot of illegal money, and that's the money will buy new weapons. So in many senses, the issue here is the illegal business that has been neglected by the government.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, given that the Farc seems to be keeping some weapons as an insurance policy, for now that's the best available estimate, does that suggest that while the Colombian people don't trust the Farc to fully disarm, maybe the Farc also doesn't fully trust the Colombian government?
Definitely. I mean, hiding weapons is again, another unfortunate but kind of standard practice in DDR processes, and it's just because of that. Handing over weapons, these processes depend completely on the trust between the parties. Here in Colombia, they have the UN mission, which is supposed to verify the arms abandonment process by the FARC. And these missions play a role because the government and the FARC by themselves do not trust each other enough to believe that, or to know that all arms have been handed over, and that the peace agreement will be completely implemented. So if the FARC are hiding weapons in the sense that they have caches which they will not report to the UN, it's exactly because of that. They want to make sure they have a fallback in case the peace agreement is not implemented, in case the guarantees that they were promised through the agreement do not come to be, and in case they feel that their option in order to get the peace agreement implemented is unfortunately go back to war. It's a fairly unfortunate but standard practice in DDR, and it has everything to do with the political conditions that the armed groups, whether they be the FARC or groups in El Salvador or in other parts of the world, how they read the political conditions for their disarmament, demobilization, and then, if be the case, their participation in politics.
Yeah, there's a lot of game theory going on, it seems. It's been a fascinating discussion. Good to talk to both of you, Kyle Johnson and Senator Paloma Valencia. Unfortunately, I've got to move on to another segment. Hope to have you both on the program again in the future. Thanks so much.